imagination that we might be able to add some support and some improvement in academic performance for our young people here in this community. We pray for all those who have come. We thank you for them, Lord God. They have come with their experience. They're coming here with their work that they have done in the field of education, and to shed some light on the needs. Lord God, we pray that you would work both in us, through us, and with us as we start on this journey that we anticipate, Lord, you will bless, and our work will not be in vain. We ask, Lord God, this in the name of our precious Lord Christ. The people of God said amen. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Turner, and thank you all for joining us today for a conversation on education in New York State and Syracuse. As we know, education, we say, is something that's very important to us. We say that education is something that everyone needs. We say that it is the key to success in all that we do. We say that education is everything. But is it really? Are we stepping up in support of our children who are in need of our efforts? Well, today we'll answer some of those conversations, give you some information that you'll be able to use, but also how do we as a community support our children? How do we as a community support our children? What do they need right now? As you know, we're coming out of a pandemic, and that's only exacerbated some of the issues that have caused us to continue to have performance gaps. So what can we do? Today we'll have a conversation from Vince Love of the 100 Black Men of Syracuse. We'll hear from Pastor Phil Turner from the Light of Syracuse and the Bethany Baptist Church, 2 video presentations from Dr. Bernard Gassaway and from Dr. Lester Young. Dr. Lester Young is of the New York State Board of Regents. We'll also hear from Reggie Stevens from the Higher Learning Network. We'll hear from Errol, Bedford, also from the Higher Learning Network, along with Vince Love, to talk to you about some plans that they have for our community. And we'll talk to Reggie again about educational involvement. How do we participate in the Board of Education meetings and the other meetings in our community? And we'll hear from the 100 Black Men about the importance of mentoring our students in the community. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you're not at this podium, we're asking that you, or lectern, we're asking that you wear your masks at all times. We're asking that you sit in the pews that are green. If they're red, don't sit in the red pew, please. Thank you. The bathrooms are out there to your right. When you go outside, they'll be to your right. And if you have questions, we'll get to that, but we're either going to have you talk or write them on the card. We'll figure that out when we get there. But very excited to be a part of this effort and working with the 100 Black Men to really have a conversation about education. What do you hope happens today? What are you looking for from this group? Write that down on an index card, and we'll hopefully get those questions answered. Bottom line is, we have to be responsible for the education of our children. Period. End of sentence. Full stop. So, if you don't take anything away from this conversation, take that away. Let's re-engage ourselves in the education of our children at all levels, K through, right? Because that's where the help has to be done. All right. So, to give you a welcome statement, purpose, and outcome, I will give you a little tease. Here's Vincent Love for the 100 Black Men. Let's welcome Vince.
Thank you, George. I first of all want to bring greetings from our 100 Black Men president, Mr. Drake Harrison. He sends his apologies. He was supposed to be here today, but I got a call last night that he had a family emergency that he had to deal with and had to be there for his family. So we certainly, all of us, understand situations like that come up. Family is a priority. And so he apologizes and asked me to stand into his stead to bring a statement of welcome to those who are here. And I do want to welcome you all for being here. I know that many people have busy schedules, and to come in on a Saturday morning to spend some time having a conversation, a needed conversation, sometimes is a sacrifice. And so, my name is Vincent. I'm a former president of 100 Black Men of Syracuse, and I just want to explain to you a little bit of why the 100 decided to call this forum together. We all know that education is a key component for any community in terms of its growth, in terms of its sustainability, and particularly in terms of putting its children on a path to have a successful and productive life in whatever community they may be in. And we also understand the challenges that have been facing this community and communities across the country with regard to educating students, particularly students of color. And so we decided that when I look at education, oftentimes we think of it as being a responsibility of the education department or the districts. But when I think about education, I see education as being a community responsibility, okay? It has to be a team effort. We can't just pass our kids off to some other institution and say, you take care of educating our children. And unfortunately, for too long, particularly Black people have been one of the few cultures that have always done that, okay? So we decided that it was time for us to come together as a community and begin to have a discussion about the responsibility of educating our students, because they are our students, they are our children, and it needs to be a communal effort in this process. And so what we're hoping to come out of this gathering here today is that when you leave here, you will first of all have heard some information, maybe some of it was something you already heard of, and maybe you'll have an opportunity to hear something that's new. So we wanted to inform the community about the state of education here in Syracuse and in the greater New York State. And then we want to just give you some ideas, some kind of like stir up some thought processes in your mind of how you as a community member may get involved, you as an elected official may get involved, even the entities that exist in our community in terms of the churches, the community centers. Like I said, it's a community effort. So everybody needs to involve in the process of educating our students. And so hopefully you'll walk away from here today, if nothing else, just thinking about what part should I play or can I play in the process of being sure that our students are properly educated, and so that we can have a viable, continuous community here in Syracuse and eventually across New York State and the country as well. So I hope everybody is excited about being here and eager to get involved in this conversation that we're going to be having. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. So, how did we get here? The impact of systemic racism on the education of students in Syracuse and New York State. I'd like to bring to you the pastor of this house, my pastor, the Reverend Phil Turner, pastor of Bethany Baptist Church, and also of the Light of Syracuse Incorporated.
Thank you, George. I was asked this morning to speak briefly on the systemic racism as it relates to education in these United States. As all of you are aware, educating African Americans has only been legal some 60-some odd years. Following the Emancipation Proclamation, some schools were educating and some African American colleges were opened, but still, it wasn't until Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, where they came up with the term separate but equal, but it was still a way of separating schools and segregating schools. And the idea was that African Americans and people of color were less than human. That was necessary to justify slavery. That these people were a servant class, uneducable, and were born to serve others. And this mindset was the foundation for the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. All of us know that the schools have never been equal, but it was a way of separating the influx of resources. All of us know this, that almost in every urban community in the United States, we have engineered clusters of African American people or people of color. We have these clusters that were engineered by redlining and also by housing discrimination, adding to the ability to limit or either to restrain resources that would go to those clusters for education. And so our education has been less resourced than other people outside of, or let me put it this way, this term that was developed for separation, for degradation, and for exploitation, the term white, enabled the schools to be separated. And so the term white is only a term that was developed in the United States. All European Americans before coming to America were either German or they were either French or Italian or whatever. But once coming to America, the line became drawn between white and non-white. Okay, so the truth be told is that there really aren't any white people, but it was created to separate and to degrade and to exploitate. And since that time, the mindset is that education of black people were not necessary because you're either going to be in the service industry, you're going to be domestics, but there's no need to educate you. And so that mindset has been established even until this day. Segregation is one of the foundational pieces for the separation of resources and for the separation of schools and the resources that go to the schools. This may be an important bit of news for you that New York State has the most segregated school system of all states in the United States. That gives them the ability to separate resources and to subjugate those people who are in urban communities, mostly where African American and people of color live. And so the resources have been separated, and this mindset about what we are able to learn and what we're able to do and our intellect has helped to create a systemic problem in the education system in these United States of America. This is exceptionally precisely the problem that we have in New York State, in that this is the most segregated state. We have the most segregated school system of any state in the U.S. And so now we have an issue where we have had this disproportionate distribution of resources that has created a population of people who have been poorly educated. Now, today, we are looking at some of the people who were able to escape the barriers, escape the limitations that were placed on you, and you were able to escape, as I call it, and get educated. You were able to go beyond the boundaries that were established for people of color because you were never intended to be educated in this country. And so since some of you have made it through, we now have you in positions of higher learning, your teachers, your professors, and now we are working now at broadening the proficiency in education for our communities. We have to lift the standard of education in our communities because our communities have been left behind because of systemic racism and systemic separation of communities of people. Now the college environment is a little bit different, being that they want athletes, and so they have been probably more forward moving in terms of being integrated. But public schools serves communities and they serve neighborhoods. Okay, and so now because they serve communities and neighborhoods, it also fuels the segregated school systems that we have throughout the country. And the ability to educate our children is it falls primarily in our hands, not in the hands of any others. We've been waiting a long time, and the cavalry isn't coming for us. So we know that by now, and as Vince pointed out, we are probably the only ethnic group in the nation that turns their children over to other people to educate. We thank God for the African American educators and the Latino educators, indigenous people educators who have followed the path of being teachers and educators and being connected to the community, connected with our people. And so, Light of Syracuse, one of our missions is, along with the similar mission that the 100 Black men have, is that we want to begin educating our children from infancy. So we are focusing on a combination preschool, nursery, or preschool and daycare, because we want to start the learning process from infancy. And most of you in education are aware of the fact that the first 8 years of a child's life are the most important years for getting them on the path for critical thinking, for problem solving, for extending their vocabulary, for them to be able to have larger or greater amounts of experiences to prepare them so that when they enter the school system, it is less likely that they fall through the cracks. And we know that the education system doesn't have a lot of resources for bringing people up out of, once they fall into special education, pigeonholes and things of that nature that affect their entire educational career. They're not prepared to lift them out very well. So we want them to get off to a good start, and then we want to own the responsibility of educating our children. And I hope I've addressed the systemic evolution as it began from the very beginning. Plessy versus Ferguson was 1896. Brown versus the Board of Education was 1964. And officially, schools were supposed to be integrated. But we know that schools aren't really integrated because we still live in clusters. We still live in segregated clusters. And there has never been equal resources, even with the law being passed, which supported segregation, separate but equal. But that has not rang true. And because we're still very, very segregated as a society in America, we still have systemic problems in the education system. So I hope I addressed that. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor Turner. Yeah, when they did pass that, they said you have to integrate with all deliberate speed, which was not fast enough for me. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. All right, let's change the narrative now. We'll have a conversation on the framework on diversity, equity, and inclusion in New York State schools, a call to action. Errol Bedford will introduce a video presentation by Dr. Bernard Gassaway.
This is Vincent, member of the 100 Black Men of Syracuse, and I am here talking with Dr. Bernard Gassaway, who is the...
Okay, Errol.
Thank you, George. Good morning, everyone. I just want to take the opportunity to thank Pastor Turner and Drake Harrison and Vince Love of the 100 Black Men of Syracuse for the opportunity to speak to you this morning about an issue that we all should be concerned about, that we have all faced concerning our children and our communities. Good morning, I'm Errol Bedford. I'm president of Higher Learning Network. And I consider myself almost like a native son of Syracuse because I graduated many, many years ago, right up the hill at Lemoyne College. So I came here, and I always tell the story about my experience at Lemoyne. I came here a boy, and I left a man. And it's a tribute to the members of the Syracuse community that helped me while I was here. So as I grew in my career, once I left Syracuse and returned to my community in New York City, you know, that penchant to give back was always an emphasis in my career. And so, over the years as a college professor and now president of a consulting company whose main mission is to help to alleviate the issues that our children face in our communities, not only in New York City, in the Syracuse community, but in New York State and throughout the country. It is our effort to help those communities who are willing and able to help our children overcome the obstacles that we face in the educational system that has not been beneficial to our goals and our needs. Okay, so this morning I would like to present to you an opportunity. Okay, an opportunity to address and to do something about the issues that our children face concerning our educational system. Earlier this year, in January, the New York State Board of Regents voted in Dr. Lester Young Jr. as the first Black Chancellor of the Board of Regents of New York State. And one of his first tasks was to develop a program, to develop a curriculum that would help to begin to try to alleviate and address the issues that our children face. And that particular curriculum is called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, okay? And he has proposed this particular curriculum for all superintendencies and school districts throughout New York State. And this morning we have an opportunity to hear from a couple of the components of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity framework. And first being major educator and educational advocate, Dr. Bernard Gassaway, who many, many years ago I was fortunate enough as a young boy to meet at Lemoyne College. Okay, Dr. Gassaway, through his career, once he graduated from Lemoyne, became a teacher in New York City, became a principal, dean, principal, and superintendent of specialized high schools in New York City, and now is a professor who mentors and teaches potential superintendents and APs and principals throughout New York State. Unfortunately, he was not able to attend this conference this morning, but during an opportunity earlier this week was willing to provide an interview from Vincent Love. So he's going to, in this interview, provide you with information concerning the framework for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion curriculum that Dr. Lester Young Jr., the new Chancellor of the Board of Regents, has disseminated throughout New York State. Okay, so if we can have the presentation of the interview.
Black Men of Syracuse, and I'm here talking with Dr. Bernard Gassaway, who is the proprietor of Gassaway ALG Consulting. How you doing, Dr. Gassaway?
I'm doing well, brother. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Listen, I want to thank you so much for joining us, at least providing this video conferencing for us. We really wish you could have made it in person, but we understand how things are. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay, so first of all, I'm happy to be here, and I wish I was there in person with you all. But as I said, my name is Bernard Gassaway. I was born in Georgia, but raised in Brooklyn, New York. And attended public schools and got what I could from them. And I was very fortunate when I went to college to go to Lemoyne College. So probably there many of you in Syracuse. So that's when I got used to the cold weather. In Syracuse,
acclimated to the weather.
Absolutely. And basically after college, I went on to get a few master's degrees, and my focus has been education. And so I went on after teaching high school, elementary school, and middle school, to become a principal and then ultimately a superintendent. And then, I left the system just to do what I consider, I call, fighting a good fight outside the system as well as in.
Well, we certainly appreciate it. We're glad to have you with us today. So I just want to jump right into it because as I look at your website and I see that you're a leader, a leadership coach, a teacher, an author, and a mentor. But I looked at some of the articles and the books that you've written. And so I want to start out by just talking. There was an article that you wrote back in about May of 2017. And in the article, and I'm just going to quote a little sentence from it, it says, after working nearly 30 years as an urban school educator, I am convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the rules of the public school game are rigged against poor and black children. The guardians of the game focus on 3 strategies to rig it: deception, fear, and misinformation. Tell me, Dr. Gassaway, in the 4.5 years or so since you wrote that article, have you or do you feel that there's been any progress in changing that narrative for our children? Or has it gotten worse?
I don't think much has changed. I think the authors of the deception have improved their practice, frankly. And I think, unfortunately, the authors have also recruited other people to participate in this deception. And when I talk about deception, I'm really talking about like results. Because I hear all the time about how the graduation rate has increased, how more students are going to college, and I hear this different data. But what you don't hear about is the students, while there may be an increase in graduation rate, there's not necessarily an increase in college graduation rate. So people are able to get into college, but not necessarily succeed once they get there, because their preparation, frankly, has not prepared them to succeed. And that's unfortunate, because our children have been, in my opinion, sacrificed for this perception of progress, which is brought about mainly by the political forces, because in order to show progress, that's accompanied with increased funding. So they try to connect funding to progress. And so there's this push, again, it's an economic motivation to show progress versus a sort of like a social, moral, ethical movement to show real progress. So I think it's unfortunate. And frankly, I'll say this, that some of the people who are participating in deception look like you and I. They look like you and me.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. That is unfortunate. And so along that line, you wrote another article around the same time, I think in August of 2017. Article was dealing with inflated graduation rates, as you spoke about recently. Okay, and in the election, local election that we have here, recent graduation rate increases was kind of held up as a sign of progress in our educational system here in this area. However, they were using data from a year that we actually been canceled due to COVID. And so there were questions about how valid that data was. What should the community and parents in particular be aware of when they're hearing or receiving data about academic performance of the school or their children, and how can they access accurate data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe that the parents and members of the community should not rely on the data that they receive from the public school officials. And I'm basing this just on my understanding and my experience in terms of working within the system. What has happened, if you look across the state, starting frankly with the State Department of Education, and even implicit in this are the members of the Board of Regents, is that when you lower the graduation standards, you're going to have more people graduate. And so that's in effect what happened over the last number of years, several years, is that there has been a lowering of the bar, and as a result, you get more people crossing over that bar. And even when it comes to passing rates, 65 in most parts of this country is considered a D. But yet, we consider that passing in terms of some level of proficiency in terms of our students. And so the only way that I think that parents can really authenticate the success of their children is by what you actually see rather than what you hear. And if you think about it, if I had a child today, my child is an adult now, but if I had a child in school, I would really want to just say, let me see if they can write, let me see myself if they can read, and then let me see if they can basically calculate. Now, that may seem like a surface level of education, but some of our children, unfortunately, even after they get their high school diplomas, they can't write, some can't read, and some can't calculate. And so, as a parent, if that is where my child is, I need to get more involved in pressuring the custodians of the system to ensure that my child is actually getting a quality education. And it's very unfortunate. Again, I keep using the term unfortunate because that's the state where we're in right now, where our children and our future is being manipulated by the people who are in power.
Yeah. And that's why we want to begin to shift our focus to providing some educational resources in ways in which we can help our young people prepare themselves for life after high school.
Right, and I know from when I was a principal back in 1997, one of my students received a 4-year scholarship for the 100 Black Men. So you don't only talk the talk, you walk the walk. And we need more organizations to do the great work that you're doing, because our children do need mentoring. And the system, when I say the system, people within the system, again, who some don't look like our children, but some do, we lower the expectations for our children, and lower expectations result or equate to low performance. And so our children get out of school, and then in some cases, they can't complete a job application or be responsible enough to complete certain tasks. But we know, you and I know, as well as members of the audience know, that our children are brilliant. Our children are brilliant, but we have to raise the bar for them and hold them true.
That's great. And so we've talked, that there are some problems and issues. That's the whole reason behind having this summit. So we can educate the community as to what the status is of the educational system here in Syracuse. And actually we're talking about statewide and probably across the country. But we also want to look at some possible solutions, things that we can do to bring about improvement. And so I know that you've been instrumental in supporting the development of an initiative put forth recently by the New York State Board of Regents. It's known as a Framework for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in New York Schools, hashtag a call to action. For the benefit of the parents and others that are listening to this presentation right now, can you kind of break down what exactly is that? What is DEI? And define those components of this initiative and how you anticipate or hope that it will bring about some change in the education system.
Okay, so first I'll start with the initiative or the framework was really developed at the New York State Board of Regents level.
Okay.
Really under the leadership of our current Chancellor, Dr. Lester Young Jr. And by way of information, he is the first African-American male to ever hold that position in that organization. And the organization was founded in 1784. And so that's significant because he is in the seat of power now. And frankly, the Board of Regents is like the Board of Education for the state of New York. And they're responsible for writing policies and regulations for all schools throughout the state. So this is the first time in the history of this country where I think the majority or near majority of the Board of Regents are of color. And that's significant because of that fact, they were able to put forth this initiative called the DEI, as you said, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And the D stands for diversity, and diversity in many respects. Diversity in terms of staffing, diversity in terms of a curriculum that the students are listening to being taught, but even in terms of diversity in terms of funding. Because if you think about where do the dollars go that are put into education, people across the state are paying property taxes to pay for education in their respective communities. In New York City, there's a budget of over $30 billion. But when we look at where those dollars are going, a very small percent, if not even maybe 1%, is actually going towards people of color. So all this money is going to people outside of our communities, and even with that money going outside of the community, it's not really doing anything to advance education of our children. So the initiative, the diversity part, is looking at diversifying staff, because some schools that are serving majority, so-called minority, black and brown children are led by white people, white teachers, white principals, white superintendents. And so the push is to sort of diversify the staffing at all levels, whether it be at the school level, the district level, and even what's called governance level. That means the school boards, so that they can start being more diverse than what they are. The equity piece really speaks about fairness. How are the funds in the school system being distributed? You know, do students actually have a voice in terms of what they're learning? Because many, if they were able to express what they're actually experiencing, the people in position to sort of change things will be reluctant to change it. So therefore, they squelch the voice. They don't really want to hear the voice of the students. Equity involves, again, the equitable distribution of funding, but also equitable distribution of opportunities for our young people, so that they can, again, have the bar raised, the expectations raised, so that our children can then flourish in the way that we know that they can flourish. The inclusion piece goes connected to equity and diversity in terms of, are all people included in these decision-making processes? For example, the curriculum. Who decides what goes into the curriculums in terms of in the respective schools? For the most part, the so-called majority, who really is minority in terms of Caucasian, but these curriculums are really focused on a narrow Eurocentric information and perspective. Very little part of the curriculum may focus on Afrocentric or Caribbean centered curriculum. And so inclusion would be including different points of view. And this is not only about black and white. It's Latino, it's Asian, it's Jews, but the people who are against diversity, equity, inclusion tend to focus on those narrow aspects of it. So when you think about, so what value would this bring to the community? Well, there's some dollar study that was done in 1954 by Kenneth B. Clark and Kenneth B. Clark and Dr. Mamie Clark. And that study showed how black children, how they looked at themselves as being negative, but when they looked at white children, they looked at being positive. Most recently, there was a reenactment of that study, and the results are the same. When black children look at themselves, they see ugly and negative. But when they look at white children, they see positive and good and even great. And so, why is that the case? We have to start with the root of the curricula that they're being taught in these schools. So diversity, equity, inclusion is looking to sort of humanize all children, particularly those who have been marginalized and those who have been disproportionately left out of any part of the system to advance themselves. And so it's a broad ask on the part of the New York State Board of Regents. I applaud them for making the effort, but we should know that there are many, many voices that have come out of the woods, literal woods, and they've been vocal against even the concept of black children being proud of themselves, being taught that they're somebody, that they have a rich history. There are people who are saying, if you teach black people to be proud of themselves, then that's going to make my child, my white child, feel less than he or she should feel. And so they're sort of taking control of the narrative. And the DEI is an attempt to give us voice so that we can control our own narrative.
That's great. So you've taken me right into my next question concerning that. Is there a role, whether directly or indirectly, that parents and or the community as a whole can play in supporting the implementation of this initiative?
Well, you in the 100 Black Men, you are the manifestation of one of the solutions, because you're actually holding this forum. You have an audience here with you today. And if each member of the audience really were to take one child, really, we can start basic sometimes, right? Just take one child under your wing, one young adult, one elementary school child, and then show them that there's somebody. Be there for them. And that it's really to show them versus saying, right? Do as I do, not as I say. And the 100 Black Men holding forums like this, I wish that this was happening all over the state and all over the country, because hopefully we can rise up and people can become more involved. Know what's going on at these different school board meetings. Show up. And some people say show up and show out, but show out in a positive way. Let the people know that the work that you're supposed to do, we want to now expose it so that work can be done. It's important that work be done. So people can do little simple things, such as writing a letter to the State Board of Education Commissioner, Dr. Betty, writing a letter to your local Board of Regents member, because Syracuse has a member that represents that area. Write a letter to the Chancellor of the Board of Regents and let them know that you understand the importance of the DEI framework and you want to support it, and that this is just the beginning, because you want to see greater things happening in schools, and you don't necessarily want the bar lowered for our children. We want to enhance what our children are learning so that they can enhance themselves and become more productive citizens. And yes, we can reduce the school to prison pipeline, and we can increase the number of young people who are going into trades, whether it be career technical education or going to college if they so choose.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gassaway. As I said, our time was a little short here, but we certainly appreciate what you've shared with us. And we're going to be following the 100. We'll be certainly following up with you to get more information and details about this initiative and some of the things that we can do to improve the educational system for our children here in the Syracuse area. But before we close, is there something, I think you had something that you wanted to share with the audience before we close? Or?
Yes, I would. I would like to share a piece that I think it would sort of encapsulate the purpose behind like DEI or any other initiatives that are looking to advance our people. So I'll share the screen at this time, and then I'll play this little short clip. And this is a clip by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I think it will speak for itself.
No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for
Thank you so much. You got me fired up now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Dr. Bernard Gassaway of Gassaway ALG Consulting, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having further conversations with you.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
You too. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Dr. Gassaway. And certainly, I hope you've been thinking about what he said. A couple of quotes that came to mind for me. The authors of Deception have improved their practice. He says, don't rely on the data from educators. That certainly should fire up the educators in here and have some questions about that. And he talked about lower expectations for our children. So I'm hoping you're thinking about what you're going to ask about that, because I certainly would have some questions if I heard that presentation. All right, we move on in the program. Reggie Stevens now to give us the data, right? What is the report on student performance and graduation grades? Should we believe the hype?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
My name is Reggie Stevens. I'm the Vice President of Higher Learning Network. Before I dive into this data, I just want to give you a little bit of my story. Been in education since 1992, started as a classroom teacher, moved into administration, vice principal, district trainer, trained all the new administrators that was hired to the district that I work for, and then I relocated to New York City, where I worked for a consulting firm called Generation Ready, one of the leading education consulting firms in the nation, until we started hiring a network. As a consultant for Generation Ready, I was promoted to Director of Education for that company, and then I partnered with Errol, and we started our own consulting firm, providing professional development for teachers, principals, superintendents around the New York City area. When I thought about this data with the Syracuse School District, I wanted to make sure that I was very thoughtful in how I put it together, and wanted to make sure that the parents who are joining us via stream can understand when they're looking at these numbers and what these numbers mean. So we're just going to dive right into it. First slide, please. So when we talk about, I'm going to first start with grade 3 grade, the state assessment. When we talk about the state assessment for ELA and math, the last time that the data was actually counted and it actually went towards rating the schools was in 2019. But we also have to look at the consistency and the trends of that data when we're talking about the Syracuse City School District. And the Syracuse City School District has consistently performed below the state average on the New York State ELA assessment. In 2018, only 15% of all students who were tested scored at or above proficiency on the ELA assessment, and in 2019, 18% of all the students who were tested scored at or above proficiency. Next slide, please. When we look at math, in 2018, only 14% of the students who were tested scored at or above proficiency. In 2019, that was 15% of all the students who were tested scored at or above proficiency. Next slide. So let's break that down. So let me explain what these graphs mean. The first blue graph is the Syracuse City School District. The yellow bar graph is the state, and the orange bar graph is the Syracuse School District in 2019. And the state is, the purple graph is the state in 2019. So we have the blue graph is Syracuse 2018, yellow, state 2019, orange, Syracuse 2019, purple, state 2019, okay? So we're looking at level 1 level 2, level 3, and level 4. We want our students to be in level 3 and level 4. That's proficiency or above proficiency. So the first set of graphs on the screen will be the level 1 students. Those are students below grade level. So when you're looking at 2018 for Syracuse School District, 60% of the students in ELA tested level 1 in comparison to the state, which was 24%. In 2019, 59% of the students tested level 1 in ELA in comparison to the state's 25%. When we look at the proficiency level, is what I explained on the previous slide. But I wanted to particularly point out this slide, looking at the level 1 students. Okay? Next slide, please. When we look at math, again, looking at the level 1 students, 70% of the students tested in Syracuse School District in 2018 tested level 1. In 2019, 67% tested level 1, significantly below average. Next slide, please. So, this next slide is going to look at the spring 2021 state assessment. Now, a lot of people assume that because of the pandemic that the state assessment was not given, but it was. It wasn't mandatory, but you had to offer it. So what I did was and all of this data is available on the New York State Education Department's website. I pulled it directly from there, so it's available to anybody who has the internet. So we're looking at grades 3 through 8 in ELA. In Syracuse School District, there were 1,441 third graders enrolled. Of that 1,441, 907 took the test. Of that 907 who took this test, 407 of those students were Black, 142 were Hispanic or Latino. Of the 407 who took the test in third grade, Black students, only 15% of them tested proficient. That's 60 students out of 407. Of the 142 Latina and Hispanic students in third grade who took the test in spring 2021, only 16 tested proficient. And this is based on this data on the New York State Education Department's data website. And as you can see, as we progress to the grade levels, the numbers aren't really varying that much. Fourth grade, 74 students of 408 Black students who took the test were proficient. 12 of 95 Hispanic students in fourth grade who took the test tested proficient. In fifth grade, there were 860 kids took the test, 400 Black, 116 Latina. Of the 400 Black students who took the test, only 36 of them tested proficient. Of the 116 Latina students, only 16. And so on and so forth. Okay? I don't want to spend a lot of time. This will be available to you. Vince has a copy. You can put it on the website and you can request a copy of it. Let's go to the next slide, please, because I want to get to the math. So, when we're looking at the math, the data is even more telling. Same number of students took maybe a little variation because not all students took the same both parts of the test. But let's just start with third grade. 408 Black students, 20 were proficient. 139 Latina students, only 8 were proficient in math. But if you look down at 8th grade, right before that, these are kids who are going into high school. 197 Black students took the test. 0 tested proficient. 56 Latina students took the test. 0 tested proficient. Okay. Next slide. High school graduation rate. Let's talk about that. Now, this was published on the Syracuse City School District website on the 14th of January 2021, and a celebration of the high school graduation rate increase. So the 2016 cohort of students who began high school in 2016 completed high school with a 4-year graduation rate of 70.7%. That's a record high for the Syracuse City School District and a 6% increase from the previous year. The 70.7% is the highest graduation rate achieved since New York State switched to cohort-based accountability for the 2002-2003 reporting year. And this is something that needs to be celebrated. Next slide, please. Let's break that data down. The district also saw increases in the graduation rate among English language learners, those students who speak English as a second language, rising to 58.1%, a 20% higher percentage rate than the previous year. Students with disabilities, those are students who are in special ed or with IEPs, rising from 49.5%, a more than 5% increase and closing the gender gap, with the number of males earning a diploma rising to 67%, an 8.5% increase from the previous year. Students enrolled in the district's career and technical education programs saw even greater gains, with a 91.4% earning their high school diploma after 4 years. But let's look at what that data really means in the context of COVID-19 and what was required for students to do. Next slide, please. And again, this data and this information came directly from the state website, so it's there for everyone to see. Regents examinations required under the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, that will be ELA, Algebra 1, Earth Science and Living Environment, will be administered during the month of June 2021. Again, passing or taking the exams are not required. Only passing the course is required to receive credit and to receive a high school diploma. And the August 2021 Regents exams were canceled. Next slide, please. Additionally, the following applies for students who attempt the Regents exams. Students' actual exam grades will post on their official records, whether they pass it or not. Students are not required to pass the exam to meet the graduation requirement. New York State Education Department cannot confirm that a student's performance on an exam won't negatively impact their transcript, particularly when it comes to post-secondary institutions. So what does this mean? They took the test, they didn't pass it, they still graduated. Can they get into a college? If the college says you need a Regents exam, a passing score, no, they cannot. Are they prepared when they go to college to do the work? Those are the things that we're up against. The numbers don't lie. So I encourage parents, ask questions, ask about the data. All of this stuff is available on the website. As Dr. Gassaway said, you can't always believe what the school system tells you. Do your own homework. You gotta look. And they didn't lie. There was an increase in graduation rate. But what are the parameters into showing that increase? And all this information I pulled directly from the website. Okay? Thank you.
Lots of questions. All right, another video presentation. Errol Bedford's coming back.
People have said, how are you doing this, right? And what happens if...
Errol Bedford will introduce this next video.
Okay, thank you again, George. You're quick on the trigger there, sir. All right. So our next video is actually Dr. Lester Young. Again, I mentioned this is the first African-American chancellor for the Board of Regents. But, you know, when I heard Pastor Turner speak earlier about the history, something came to mind, and and it's about history. So this is not the first attempt here in New York State to develop a curriculum that's devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many, many years ago, in the 1980s, there was an attempt to have a Black history curriculum established in New York State schools. I'm fully aware of that because I was actually the individual that helped propose that particular initiative way back when I was a junior at Lemoyne College. And during that particular time when, in 1976, when President Ford, during the bicentennial celebration of the United States, commissioned that February would become Black History Month, okay? Following that particular proclamation, no one was celebrating Black History Month. So by the time I got to up here in Lemoyne College in the 1980s, there were pockets of Black leaders throughout the country that came together to decide, well, how do we get individuals, how do we get this country to celebrate Black history? And so there was determination to have governors of major states throughout the country and mayors of major cities throughout the United States to sign proclamations deeming that February would be celebrated as Black History Month. So in that race between the pockets of Black leadership, you had a leadership group comprising members of the New York State chapter of Urban League, the African Pan American Association, advocate groups like the Minority Cultural Society from Lemoyne College that came together and actually had the then Mario Cuomo, governor of New York State, signed the first proclamation for recognizing history of February as Black History Month. And I'm fully aware of that because he signed it on my shoulder when I was working for Charles Anderson. Okay? So, in that proclamation, the one key element that I was fervent about was that Black history needed to be taught in New York State. And when Governor Cuomo signed it, and the Chancellor at that time for the New York State Education Department agreed to it, and then the commission that, the task force that was tasked to develop the curriculum fell by the wayside by the year 1985. Now, the proclamation was signed in 1983. I kept track of that. Even though I left Syracuse, went to New York, started my professional career, I kept track of that. That promise was reneged. Okay? The commission, the original commission, was decommissioned in '85. And so out of that decommission, guess what happened? In 1987, critical race theory was developed. Okay? So, critical race theory is not taught to our children. Critical race theory is a curriculum that's for higher education institutions. I know, I'm a former college professor. That curriculum is so advanced, okay? There's no way that that's being taught to our children in our school districts. There is no way. But you see it on television, okay? Where you have these parent groups who have been told a lie that their children are being taught this particular curriculum. That's way above them. It's not being taught to them. That's ridiculous. But my point in stating this is that you see those particular groups, their parents, at these board meetings, harassing members of community boards and educational boards, sticking up for the children and the misjustice that they feel that their children are going through, which is not true. So they don't want critical race theory in their the children being taught critical race theory. But to me, critical race theory just replaced another CRT that our children have been taught from the beginning of this country, which I call Caucasian racial theory. Okay? They want to keep that in place. So this is personal for me in the respect because I had that deal that was promised to me, Charles Anderson, and other members of the Black leadership group here at Syracuse, that Black history would be taught in the schools in New York State. I never forgot that. And I said one day I would come back and try to do something about this. Okay? So, with Dr. Young's determination to begin this curriculum of DEI, I just want to present this particular presentation to you from Dr. Young, very short, determining that we, as members of our communities, okay, have a call to action for our children, just like all the other groups in this country do for their children. And we see it on television every day, but I don't see our groups doing the same thing for our children, for the curriculum being taught in the schools to them that we've had to endure for how so long. When is that going to change? And nobody's going to do that for us, only we can do it for ourselves. That's it. So, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to present to you the call to action by the new Chancellor of the New York State Board of Regents, Dr. Lester Young, Jr.
People have said to me, well, you know, why are you doing this, right? And what happens if the opposition starts to turn over school boards and fire superintendents and fire district office staff and fire teachers and on and on and on. And what I tell people, and you know, part of the reason why we have to tell our history is that you don't always get in a fight just because you know you're going to win. And I want to say that again, because sometimes it's very telling. You know, you learn a lot about a person. In fact, what's around the corner may not be as important as the actions that you take in the moment. And so what I would say, you know, we're in this until it's over. A couple other things you should know, and this is important. When we passed the policy, we did two things last Monday. We passed the policy, but we also unveiled what we call the seal of civic readiness, right? Which essentially says that we gotta help our young people to become more civically prepared and engaged, right? And if anything taught us why we could do that, it was the election that occurred when Trump was elected. And so we have got to help our young people understand their obligation to not only be aware, but to be engaged and to help our people in our communities. Now, we advanced that. And because it's a regulation, we have to, the law says we have to put the regulation out for 30 days for public comment. And so here's what the opposition is doing. They're saying that not only is there something wrong with the framework, but what's wrong with the framework is also wrong with civic engagement. They're saying, we're saying civic engagement, and they're saying, well, that's another way to indoctrinate children. And it's un-American. Now think about it. And that's the line that they're taking. So it has nothing to do with the truth. It has nothing to do with evidence. You know, they have a script, and they're going to keep saying it over and over and over until some people get it, right? And then they are hoping that if enough people start to believe it, then it will motivate them to action. And so what I think we've got to do I mean, we have to do what we've always done, but I think it's going to be important that we have to be smarter with data, right? And we have to act on some of these things, and we have to call out some of this stuff. Because don't you want your young people to be civically engaged? I mean, don't we want our youngsters to be financially aware and prepared? Do we know what happens to our young people when they're not financially literate? How they get crushed and destroyed, and manipulated. And so why wouldn't we want that for all young people? And so all I'm saying to you is this opposition, this is not about ideology. This is really about, when they actually said, we want life to be the way it used to be. I mean, that's the kind of rhetoric they're using. You know, we want it to go back to the way it was. We don't need teacher diversity. We don't need equity. And we're allowing this to happen. So I just think we've got to be more articulate and more focused about what we need. And we do have to have an agenda, just the same way they have an agenda. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leslie Young. So where do we go from here? What role can you all play in the community to support the education of our students? Here's Reggie Stevens once again.
So, I want to particularly talk to parents, those of you who are here and who have joined us via the live stream. The first thing that all of us can do to make a difference is to vote. You have to show up and vote. Exercising your right to vote is critical to making positive steps toward reforming the school system. When the time comes to elect new officials for your child's school, school board, or local school districts, pay attention to those proposed policies that they're putting before you. Take note of politicians and other potential candidates who are proposing solid ideas for lasting, beneficial change. That's the first thing we can do is vote. Like Dr. Young said, a lot of these things are influenced by the people who hold political office. And things will happen if they allow them to happen, or they won't happen if they say they're not going to happen. But they can't get in office unless we vote them into office. So that's the first thing. And keep up with the national news around education, because that is going to eventually trickle down to Syracuse City School District. Start to take a look at the bigger picture of education as a whole in our country. Educate yourselves on the national issues regarding academic standards. That can help you to make better decisions and advocate more strongly at a local level. And use your power to vote to create change at a national level when bills are up for approval. What can you do locally? First, join the PTA and show up. And you don't have to show up and show out, but you have to show up and pay attention and ask questions. Attend the special events that the school is having. And I know people work, you can't always get there, but try to make your presence known. And pay attention to your child's grades. Ask them, what are you doing in school? What are you learning? What's the purpose of it? Because that's part of the curriculum. The teacher has to make sure the kids know what the learning target is and why they're learning it. And if your child can't tell you why they're learning something, ask that teacher a question. If you can't talk to them, send them an email, send them a text message, send them a note in your child's agenda, but you have to stay in communication. The teacher is always the first point of contact. Don't go directly to the principal. Start with the teacher. If you don't get an answer from the teacher, then you go to the principal. If you don't get an answer from the principal, then you go to the superintendent or his or her designee. But I will caution you about this. Parents, make sure you document when and how you try to communicate with the teacher, with the principal, with whoever. Because if, as a principal, when a parent came to me and had some issues or concerns, my first question to that parent was, have you spoken to the teacher? Have you emailed the teacher? Did you call the teacher? And if they couldn't, if they had no answer for me, go back and talk to the teacher first. Because you don't want to take that power away from the teacher. But I won't keep moving. Also, encourage your child to learn everywhere they go. Make sure that they are observant. A trip to the grocery store can be a learning process. Learn more about your local school. Ask questions. Don't just assume that every school functions the same as it did when you were a kid. Schools are very different now. Take the time to understand the rules and regulations of your local schools by investigating the curriculum. And if you don't understand it, ask the teacher. That's their job to explain it. The textbook choices, ask about it. And the required courses. Read the standards that teachers are held to and don't hesitate to ask questions. I can't explain to you enough how important it is to ask questions. Parents have more power than you think. They have all the power. You can make the school what you want it to be, but you gotta show up in order to do that. Ask your kids, before you move full stream ahead by organizing a protest or whatever you think you might want to do, ask your kids how they feel about it. Because it's going to affect them when they go back into that environment. So in other words, before you go up to the school to show out, talk to your kids. Okay, what's going on in school? Ask them to explain. Go talk to the teacher first. If you don't get an answer, then you move ahead. But don't just show up and show out, how sometimes we like to do. And the teachers in the audience know what I'm talking about. And remember, you have a choice. You have the right to ensure that your child receives the education that you desire. As a result, you can select which school they attend, if by deciding where you live, sometimes, but sometimes we're stuck where we're stuck. And if that's the case, you can show up at that school and require and demand that the people in that school do what they're supposed to do. But you have to show up, and you have to be present, and you have to ask the questions, and everything you may not understand. So you seek the answers, and you seek that understanding. Ask them to explain it to you. If the teacher sends something home that you don't understand, send her an email. Teachers have to check their emails. They're required to. And if they don't answer you back, that's when you contact the principal. I've emailed him or her 6 times, and I got no response. What's the deal? And trust me, that principal will follow up with that. Just some things you can do at home. Routines are essential. Set up daily routines. That includes healthy eating and healthy bedtimes. I know a lot of the high school parents say, I can't get him or her off that internet, unplug it at a certain time. They can't use it if it's not working. Provide a place and time at home for homework. Designated time, designated areas. Check on assignments. Talk each day with your child about his or her activities. Promote literacy by reading yourself. Lead by example. Limit and monitor TV, watching, gaming, social media. That's very important. Express high expectations at all times and attend the parent-teacher conferences. If you can't show up in person, ask them to do a virtual. One thing that the COVID has taught us is the use of technology. We have been able to do lots of things via Zoom, via Teams, via Google Meets. If you have a Gmail account, you have a Google Meet account, and it's free. And teachers will meet with you via virtual meetings. And participate in the decisions that affect your child's education. Don't just let teachers make decisions or schools make decisions about your students or your child without you having input and you fully understanding what it means and the implications around that. Okay? Thank you.
You might have to take that phone from your list. because that's what they're doing now.
Experienced parents said that.
It's okay. Continuing on, so now that we know what to do, how about mentoring as an opportunity? So Tony Clark, Vice President of Operations, and Joe Gregory, Vice President of Operations for the Vice President of Programs for the 100 Black Men, will talk about how they mentor in schools.
All right. What they see is what they'll be. That's what we preach, that's what we stand for, and the role of the 100 is mentorship. And that is to show, guide, counsel, pilot, shepherd, tutor. So we do those things right now in various ways. We have our youth empowerment program for youth 4 through 8th grade. We have managed to meet over this period of COVID through Zoom. We have presented our young people with experiences and learning from cooking in the kitchen with their parents there beside them, helping them to manage how to use the stove, use a knife to cut vegetables, and also educate them about where their food comes from, and also discussions on the nutrition. We have now recently we are doing Zooms like short hour presentations to our kids, and we are working on doing 2 virtual meetings and 1 gathering in a place where kids will come, and we are having them do the protocols for COVID and social distancing and all those things, and do activities that are learning activities and social activities, and an opportunity for us to actually talk. Because I believe that mentoring more than anything is not so much what we do, it's what we teach them and what we show them. And we don't always, I know in the old days parents used to say, do as I do as I say, not what I do. But that's not necessarily the best for all parents. And the other part of our mentoring program is also to mentor our parents. Most of our parents are a lot younger than we are. And some of them need a lot of help in directing their children and the process of directing their children, because a lot of them didn't learn how to do that. Parenting is a learning as you go, and we need a lot of help. For us who have been through that parenting thing, we know that what we give our children is encouragement, direction, and hope. Because even though we're presenting them with a whole lot of things, a lot of information and direction, they don't always turn out as we see them turn out. They turn out to be good citizens, but they don't always make the choices we want them to make. But we continually pray for them, because we know that as we grew, we learned. As they grow, they will learn. And we want them to be able to present to our grandchildren the things that we were attempting to teach them, and they learn later, but we want them to give them to our grandchildren sooner. Because we know that education is the second best thing to salvation. So I had a pastor who used to say, if you don't get salvation, would you please get some education? So that's what we are with the 100, trying to instill values into our community, our kids, our parents and of the programs that we have going on. The second one is the Step 1 program, which is our 8th through 12th grade individuals, boys and girls, not just boys. And we discussed last year, we did Zoom again, of course, we had to go through that. And we did Black Lives Matter, collaborating with Vera House with domestic violence education. We want our young men to actually grow to be well-rounded and full individuals. So, and those things that we're trying to present, we're continually going to do those things, and we have some other things that we're developing that we're going to present when COVID, releases us to do some of those things that we have on our heart. So that being said, I'll give you to my brother.
Thank you, Joe. I won't be with you long on this, but I was just reminded when they asked us to talk about mentoring, and pretty much we're really trying to promote the fact that we need your kids to come out of the house and get involved, get back into the game. And one of the things I was thinking about, since we are in church, the Bible constantly talks about train up a child in the way he should go. And when he gets old, he shall not depart. And one of the things as a prior military person, I've learned that everything begins with training. We call it teaching, we can call it whatever it is, but when you're training, training never stops. It's always a constant process. And we believe that with our kids, we're training them. Each level always should be another level up. You got that level 1, level 2, level 3. And one of the things that the 100 prides itself on is that our mentoring is over a lifetime. We don't just stop when they just at one level. We want to constantly keep going. And part of my role in this is with the mentoring is that we are not only going to talk the talk anymore. Going into 2022, we're going to start getting the information about what the kids, their grades. We're going to about if it's an SAT or whatever. We're going to gather that data, their grades, and what we're going to do is we're going to put that in our system, which we have created. That's going to actually we can be able to monitor their status, so that way we can be able to adjust. Yeah, we hear what the school says, but when they come to us after the school process, we can see, well, that grade, well, wait a minute, what happened in reading? Why your scores dropped from the last time we saw? And so 100 wants to be a little more involved in what the process is. And one of the good things about that, we're also going to keep the time for their as far as our mentoring, their volunteering time as well, because we want the kids to be feel accountable. And one of the things, if you can make a young person or young woman accountable, feel that, if they miss a day, they should be pulling on, why did I miss that day? Why? We want to get that mentality going in our young men and young women. And one of the things that we've got a lot of new programs going on. We've had some programs, Joe may have mentioned, this year, and all of them are continually graduating from one level to another. And the YEP program was definitely designed for us. We found that we were starting mentoring at 6th grade. We found that 6th grade was we were getting them too late, so we've actually pushed that back to 4th. Now we're actually taking those young men and young women at 4th grade, and we're finding a lot more positivity. And believe it or not, we're finding out we're getting a lot more parent involvement, because now they got to be in the room. And what has been great, even if I wish we could show the video, we did a cooking session, and we told the kid can't cook without the parent in the room. So and all that. As a matter of fact, the parents were trying to cook the food more than the kids, but we won't talk about that. But overall, what we're trying to do in the 100, and I'm going to just try to wrap it up, is that we want to let you know if a parent comes to us with our mentoring program and say, hey, how is Johnny doing? I said, well, based on what we have here and what our data and all that good stuff, I know what the school has, but this is what we're doing. And what we're going to do based on what we have, we're going to kind of tailor it to what we're doing. So either school is going to tailor their program, we're going to tailor ours to meet the needs of that young man and young woman. So we're excited about that. And one of the couple of programs that we even have coming up, even for our high school kids, we call it the Future 100. We're going to try to get into with our high school kids, 10th through 12th grade, and maybe in the first year. And we're going to actually get a group of kids. I think our number is going to be about 20. And we're going to be bringing in professionals to talk to these kids. And a lot of times kids need to see something in front of them. They need to see a successful black man or woman talk about how they got from point A to point B, how they achieve their goals. And we're going to put these professionals and put these kids out in the pews and let them see and see what's going on. And also with those programs going to involve internship, stipends, all these little things that are going to help them succeed. And also colleges involved in that as well. So when we have kids that are interested, we're going to channel in and bring in these professors to talk about the opportunities and maybe even show them how to fill out the applications and whatever it takes to get to that point. And the reason we're doing that because we don't want to just be talking about, hey, come to this program and we'll see what we can do. No, come to this program and we're going to show you how to be successful. And that is our goal, and that's what the 100 is planning on doing in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Tony. All right, Vince Love and Errol Bedford back to talk about establishing our own educational institutions, and then your questions, and then we shut it down.
Good evening. First of all, I want to thank you all for just staying here with us. We started late today, but we want to allow you an opportunity to ask some questions, make some comments. What are your thoughts from what you've heard today and what you've seen? But real quickly, I just wanted to let you know that some of you may have already been aware of the fact that some years back, the 100 started looking at the opportunity of opening a charter school here in the Syracuse area. And we met with different opinions and obstacles and different ideas about, as we approached people telling them what we were going to do. But we are holding fast, we are steadfast, continuing on that course. We know that there is some opposition to us doing that. A lot of that revolves around financially, but as I said earlier, educating our students is a community responsibility. And a lot of times, as we started working with the young people in this area, and we saw the need for additional resources for them, we felt like we need to get off the sideline and find something that we can do hands-on to help our young people be educated. And so that's why we pursued this course of opening a charter school. Because as you see, many of the problems we have here in Syracuse people are having across the state, across the country. But there are some things that have been happening across the country and in other places that haven't happened here in Syracuse. And that is, there has not been an educational institution that has been established, maintained, and operated by a group of people of color. And so that would be a unique opportunity that we're trying to provide here in Syracuse, where we can actually be hands-on with educating our own students. And we're working, we've partnered with Higher Learning, and they have been with us for the past about 2.5, 3 years now in this process. And we are continuing to move forward in the hopes and in the confidence that we will be able to achieve that end. And so now what we want to do at first, we have passed out some cards because we weren't sure how many people were going to be here that may want to have questions. But we want to give you an opportunity now to ask those questions, and hopefully we can give you the answers that you may be looking for right now. So is there anybody that's got a thought, question that they would like to comment on, and we can have someone bring a mic to you?